Okay, got a couple folks pouring in. Welcome, welcome. Oh, some familiar names anyway. I don't see their faces, unfortunately, but some familiar names. That's great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nick Hool. I work at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'll be doing some of the back-end tech administration of this webinar today. Just a couple of housekeeping points. We're going to let Gary and Becky chat with each other for a few minutes at the start, and then we'll be taking questions throughout. So I'll pop in and read those questions out. You can put those in the chat or the Q&A function, either way, assuming that we can get to all of them. Usually these are pretty lively discussions, and we want to keep it as engaging as possible for everyone. So feel free to ask anything and everything that comes to mind, and we're so excited to have you. All right. It looks like, okay, folks are still coming in. So let's give them maybe another minute and then we can get the conversation started.
Sounds good. In the meantime, it would be helpful if, as you're joining us, if you could just tell us who you are and where you're from.
Yeah.
It'd be helpful in the chat, just to get a feel for who's in the house.
Definitely.
I'm coming to you live from an Airbnb on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Today
I like the street sign behind you, Gary. Happy Avenue.
Yeah,
I did too.
yeah.
Very cool.
That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Susan Kroll from Worcester, Ohio. Great. Just in my neck of the woods anyway. Dan Piercy.
Mesa Community College, Nicolay College. Oh, yeah. Nicolay College did some stuff there. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Kate. Congratulations. We were just talking about you at NACCE the other day. Super
awesome.
Excited about your appointment. Congratulations.
Mason City. Been to Mason City. Welcome, Mary. Sophia from Glendale.
Javier is chiming in on the Q&A. Hi, everyone. Buenos dias. Javier from Tucson, Arizona. Great to have you, Javier.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cheyenne, Wyoming. Minden Fox. That's great.
Hi, Leslie.
Leslie's in the house.
Yeah, glad you're here.
Awesome.
Monica Durham from Mansfield, Ohio, just down the road from where I live in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Gary, did I ever tell you I grew up in Akron, Ohio? I don't know if you've had that conversation, but every time I see people from Ohio, I just kind of get a little heart flutter. That's where I grew up. I went to college in Ohio and haven't lived.
Lost you for a second there, Becky.
Oh, yeah. Now you're back. There we go.
Right back?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and we're all having a little bit of wonkiness with the Wi-Fi today, so just be patient because we were talking in a few minutes before the webinar started, and occasionally one of us would freeze for a second or two. So
we're all well used to that. So okay, it looks like the stream has slowed down from folks joining in. So if the two of you want to get started, Javier has a quick question, quick technical note. Your mic input level is a little low.
How's that? Is that better?
You sound okay to me. You might be able to do something if you click the little up arrow next to the mute button and go to audio settings. You might be able to futz with it there, but
let me see what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Test speaker, microphone, audio settings.
The input volume, you can up the input volume, I think. If not, Javier, you may just want to turn it up while Gary's talking. That
input volume. Let me see what I can do.
Oh, there you are. That's a lot louder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, Javier.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off, and then when questions start flooding in, I'll pop back in and read those out to you both.
Sounds good. Let's roll. Good. Well, thank you, Nick and Becky. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you as part of our ongoing series called Entrepreneurship in Education. And I don't know of anyone who's doing more to bring entrepreneurship to education than you are. And I'm assuming that most folks on this call know who you are, but if they don't, I'll just, the brief bio. background is Dr. Rebecca Corbin is the president and CEO of NACCE, which is the National Association for Community College Entrepreneurship. So Becky, welcome to the webinar series. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And the theme today is how are community colleges accelerating innovation and equity? And what I'd like to do is start with the conversation, and hopefully, you and Al get going, and then folks can chime in and start asking questions, and we can make this a very interactive and robust conversation. So I want to just start, Becky, by asking you, what is NACCE all about? Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, well, first of all, Gary, thank you so much for inviting me. I see so many good friends in the chat, so it's always a pleasure to connect. NACCE, in a nutshell, was started almost 20 years ago on the campus of Springfield Technical College in Western Mass. And it started as an idea. The idea was that entrepreneurship should have a place, a core place within cross disciplines in community colleges, as well as in K-12, and then on into the university. So over time, NACCE, the ethos or the core of it really hasn't changed. We've gotten bigger and we've gotten more robust in some of the grant funded projects and some of the more policy focused things that we do these days. But it's really all about getting entrepreneurship into the classroom, regardless of what the subject is, and also into communities. And how does that happen? It happens through faculty, it happens through administrators and presidents who really take the time to understand it and commit to it. So real quick, as of today, we have about 330 colleges across the country. A growing number of historically Black colleges and universities are joining our ranks, and a couple thousand people engage with NACCE every single day, every single week, to try to come together, to learn, to share, and to try to move things forward.
So Becky, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about this, but I'd like to hear in your words, why now? Why entrepreneurship? Why now? What's the imperative?
Yeah, I mean, if not now, when? So that is the first question. I think all of us on this webinar, all of us in the country have been challenged in ways large and small, on the very personal level, and the work level, and the friendship level. And I think it's a really great opportunity for people to really think about how can their mindset really dictate success, whatever success means. It might be meaning being a good parent, or being a good friend, or it might mean being a business owner. It might mean being a more exceptional teacher that can reach your students. And in my experience, and especially through the last 18, 19 months, I feel like entrepreneurship has that opportunity to bring us together as people who have different experiences, different beliefs in many regards, but everybody wants a better quality of life. And I think everybody wants ultimately that freedom to self-actualize. And to me, entrepreneurship does this. And in times of strife and consternation and challenge, I think we lean into entrepreneurship because, quite frankly, we don't really have a choice. If you don't, you're going to either be going backwards or potentially being at great risk. So I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful about the number of business starts. I'm hopeful about survey data that we've had coming back, that colleges are continuing to move along with their entrepreneurship programs and start more maker spaces. So I'm suffering at times like the rest of everybody, but I'm very hopeful, Gary.
Yeah. That's exciting. And Becky, I've been talking to you about this for years, and one of these days I'm going to put my pen where my mouth is, and write a piece about this. But to me, community colleges are the ideal institutions to become the community hub for entrepreneurship for so many different reasons, because of the inclusivity, because of the interdisciplinary access, the connection with the community. I don't know. What are you seeing there? What are your thoughts about a community college being the hub of entrepreneurial activity in a community?
I would say yes, yes, and yes. And when I really experienced that was back in 2008. And you'll remember that was the economic decline. Remember, we had the mortgage scandals. I mean, everything was really at risk. I mean, it seems like a long time ago and minor compared to what we're going through today, but there were so many people losing jobs. That was the time that I made the shift from working in the public television system to the community college. And I made that decision because I had the opportunity to meet somebody who was a community college president at the time that saw the potential of community college students and institutions to pivot and to be nimble in certain respects, almost in ways that universities couldn't move as fast. And so long story short, I was recruited to run a small foundation at a community college. And the president said to me, you've got a great fundraising background. You've had this, high level position. I'm just going to set you loose and you just figure out what to do for the foundation. And I loved his spirit because he was very entrepreneurial and I saw the need and the opportunity. So at that time, we thought, well, how are we going to raise money? We don't really have a brand. Nobody's been out making calls. So what we did is we started giving money away. We said, okay, students who need scholarships, people who need things, we're going to just start doing things. I didn't realize that at the time, but that was really where I leaned into my entrepreneurial journey and where it began for me. And all the way along, so this is 13 years in this journey, every time I turned around, I would see opportunities. And I realized if I could cultivate my mindset, I could begin to really, quite frankly, change the world because I could change who I was on a daily basis. If I had a bad day, I made a bad choice, I tried something that didn't work, I could always start again the next day. I'll tell you super quick too, Gary, one of the pivotal moments that happened for me, and I was telling you yesterday, I was at the NC IDEA office meeting with Tom Rue and some other folks in North Carolina, was going to my first NACCE conference in 2014. And I walked into an Ice House breakout session. The book, of course, that you wrote with Clifton Talbert. And I remember sitting there and thinking, first of all, I didn't resist going to the conference, but I didn't think entrepreneurship had a lot to do with me. And I left your session, you gave me a copy of your book, and I was flying home and I was reading it. And I thought, oh my gosh, first of all, these are my people and this is the path forward. And I've, throughout the years since then, I guess going on 8 years into it, I've never lost that passion. So really, you're part of my story. And I think just reflecting on that story is what we all should do, especially now that we have more time because we're not going as many places as we used to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, Becky. And so, but what I think you're saying is like you were already being innovative and entrepreneurial in your role. But the book, like the Ice House book, just sort of codified it in a way that you could saw, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Like this is there. Is that what you were saying? Like
I was actually saying something even bigger than that, because I probably wasn't as entrepreneurial then as I am today. But when I read this story of the Ice House, about the cotton fields and all the challenges and a certain person overcoming that, I started to see the challenges that I was working with on my campus. I was a success coach in addition to a number of other things. And I was thinking about, like, if people had the opportunity to see themselves in a bigger way and to develop tools, they didn't have to be complicated tools, where they could advance themselves forward. At that time I had, had some work experience and had some education, but some of these folks didn't have it. But I saw the potential and the power of a story to transform people. And that was interesting for me reading that book, because I never, well, maybe before I'd had a little bit had that experience, but not in such a profound way. And it might have been, I was at the right place and I was at the right time and I was ready to hear that story. But I went back and just everything changed for me, and just accelerated, I think, my ability to assess risks, to partner with people, and to really kind of commit lifelong to this way of life in addition to a profession.
Yeah. I mean, it's not difficult for someone to see talking to you that you definitely got the bug. you definitely got bit by the entrepreneurial bug, and like kind of once you get it, you can't undo it. It's
That's
kind of
right. You
it's
can't.
kind of so Becky, can you talk about I keep you referring, I've been for years now, but I keep making reference to this comment from the World Economic Forum about it's not enough to have entrepreneurship on the perimeter, that it needs to be at the core of the way education operates. That's the drum that I keep beating. It's great that you've got an incubator. It's great that you've got an entrepreneurship minor or certificate or whatever. But, what are you seeing in terms of like best practices in entrepreneurship in the community college? Let me ask you that first, and then ask you, where are you seeing it shifting from the perimeter to the core, if you are at all?
Yeah, so to answer your first question about sort of centers of excellence within community colleges, I think, and what I see engaging with people around the country is the maker movement and maker spaces, fab labs, if you will, that really provide an opportunity. It hasn't stopped even during the pandemic where we couldn't get together, but people actually making things together with their hands. It could be making music, it could be making, a bookcase, it could be making a lot of different things. It could be making a quilt. And I think what I've seen at community colleges that really lean into identifying assets around them and not just sort of the sage on the stage, talking about entrepreneurship, but going out into the communities and meeting people where they are. I've seen this a lot in Appalachia. I'll just give you one example. There's a college in Appalachia, Big Sandy Community and Technical College, which was the site of the Hatfields and the McCoys conflict. So that's their claim to fame. But, they've had some pretty significant challenges, not even, talking about the pandemic, but before that. But I see what they do is they really look at what's around them, and then they try to include as much cross-disciplinary, as much into the community as they can. So they're looking at it kind of from an ecosystem perspective. So I see a lot of that in the state of West Virginia. There is a ton of activity, as you know, going on in the state of California. So,
Yeah.
Examples of, we're involved in a project right now with the Chancellor's Office that is working with 4 community colleges and MIT in Boston, looking at invention mindset, which is somewhat similar to entrepreneurial mindset. So thinking, and I was on a call yesterday where Sarah College and Chaffey College, they were talking about kind of doing something that they'd never done before. And they were really leaning into it, and they were helping each other. They were saying, well, this was our experience. We did this workshop and we had this just amazing, outpouring, and they were not just traditional college age students. There were some young ones, and there were some like career changers. And I think when I see that, and I see it everywhere, because every local community, as you know, has a community college for the most part. Some of them, I think, that really, put a flag in the ground and say, we are embracing this. They're not saying we're doing it perfectly or that we're doing everything, but we are, endeavoring to move the dial. And one other thing, Gary, I will tell you, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of community colleges are facing right now is enrollment. It is huge. We did a workshop a couple of weeks ago in Chattanooga, broke people up into groups, and everybody came back with the same challenge of community college people. So, and using some of your language and the things that we talked about, how might we use entrepreneurship, to your second point of bringing that from the perimeter to the core? Because if you look at entrepreneurship in terms of life success, growth mindset, student success, if we can start to populate the community with this understanding that this is a welcoming place for them, they can come, they can self-actualize. Well, the way that they're going to do that, I believe, is through entrepreneurship. And I think you know, maybe some of the people tuning in here have not been involved with the Ice House curriculum or other, you know, things that are out there. But I think bringing diverse people together from, you know, it might be people who work at a church, it might be an educator, it might be a business owner, people that can come together and learn together and say, you know, how can we take what's at our disposal and make something out of it and make a better life for people? That's why I agree with you 100%. I truly believe it has to be at the core. If we really want profound change, that's where it's going to happen.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes, Becky, when people ask me, what is an entrepreneurial mindset? My response is, well, gee, I don't know. What is a non-entrepreneurial mindset? Right?
Yeah.
To just get people to think differently about, oh, you know, I have an employee mindset, which is, you know, what are the assumptions and what are the differences in each? And the argument I'm making is that the distinction between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur are becoming obsolete. Am I frozen here? I think my Wi-Fi is maybe a little bit wonky.
A bit, but we can hear you, or I can hear you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question that you pose, Gary, because I think if you're in the mindset of an entrepreneur, you're in the space of possibility and the space of collaboration and the space of being hopeful and the space, hopefully, of being very authentic. If you're non-entrepreneurial, I think you're maybe in the space of being stuck because, you know, to me, being entrepreneurial means kind of coming on this webinar, knowing that, you know, I see many good friends are on, but like you said, we could agree to do this and nobody shows up, right?
Right.
But we've opened the invitation to people, and so, you know, you probably have a deeper understanding of it than I do, but I think entrepreneurial mindset is a commitment. It's kind of like being a parent. You're going to do your best every day, and there's going to be some fantastic days and there's going to be some really bad days, but you have to continue every single day if you really want to be on that path and do your best to be reflective and think about, you know, they say even with young people in our lives, it takes a village. I think it takes a village even more so today than ever before, because you're confronting so many challenges. And I liked, and I don't know if you have it at the ready, but I know when we talked a couple months ago, you told me you came up with a new definition of entrepreneurship or I can't even say it, entrepreneurial mindset. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I thought about that when you were kind of wrestling with that.
So I came up with this, and I think it's a really important conversation, Becky, because I think a lot of the obstacles to embracing entrepreneurship and education are the ways in which we define it. And so I just want to set that context before I lay out the definition that people, particularly in higher ed, they hear the word entrepreneur and they think, oh, that's a business. It doesn't have anything to do with me. So they think of it, you know, as negative, or they just think of it as it's just not in my sphere. And I think that's the challenge that you and I face. We have to redefine it in a way that's relevant to everyone. And so my definition of entrepreneurship is the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others.
Mm-hmm.
And in creating value for others, we empower ourselves. And I think, so fundamentally, the difference between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur has to do with the mindset, which are the, you know, deeply held beliefs that we're not aware of. And I think the primary idea here, Becky, is that it's locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone with an employee mindset has a deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that someone else is going to tell me what I need to learn and do in order to be successful in life. And the entrepreneurial mindset says it's up to me to figure out what I need to learn and do in order to be successful in life. I mean, I think at its core, like that's the fundamental difference. And in my definition of entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others, you can embrace that in any situation, whether you work at a fast food restaurant or you're set out to change the world. And the question I ask, particularly young people in my talks, is what's preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? And again, it's another question to provoke our deeply held beliefs that might be limiting us. And I think that that's sort of a distinguishing factor from the entrepreneurial to the non-entrepreneurial. And you know, I think, to be fair, Becky, like the employee mindset, let's just call it that for lack of a better word, the traditional employee mindset was, you know, more or less essential for someone to succeed in the last century. If you followed the rules and did what you were told, you got into a company, you climbed the ladder, you were well paid, you could raise a family, you could retire with a pension. That's gone. That's gone. Like, so the employee mindset, I just want to say this, to be fair, I don't want to be disparaging. It's a mindset that was once essential, but it's now become obsolete. And I think that's the challenge that you and I face, is to help educators understand entrepreneurship more broadly.
I think you're right. And I think the challenge is for education, both K to 12 and to some extent, higher education too, is in some ways it hasn't changed that much. I mean, It has, and a lot of the people that are here, because I can see their names, and, there are people that embrace experiential teaching and the flipped classroom and all kinds of, one of our members who's at John Carroll University told me one time he lets his students grade themselves, and he got into a big argument with the establishment about that. But by and large, if you look at schools, it hasn't really changed that much. I mean, and I think there are people out there, allies of ours, Ted Dintersmith and others, and EntreEd, the Consortium for Entrepreneurial Education, that realize if you really are going to change not only teaching and learning, but you have to change sort of the way that you invite people into the conversation. And I think what is the resistance factor in some of that is power and control.
Yeah.
Because think about it, if I'm the president of a college and I say, okay, we're going to be entrepreneurial so people can kind of do whatever they want. Okay, all of a sudden, potentially I've lost control if I don't have firm parameters. So if you're stuck in a mindset of hierarchical mindset, and I can tell you it's not just old people, because I have been dealing with some young people that will come to me and say, well, I feel more comfortable in a hierarchical. I want you to tell me what to do. And I tell them, I want you to figure it out, and not figure it out yourself, but work with him and her in this ambiguous space. And that's uncomfortable for people. And I think what we can do as thought leaders and the work, and everybody who's tuning in, is be authentic and honest enough about it to say, I know it's uncomfortable. It's really messy because it's not traditional, but in a sense, we're tackling times and problems. It's not the industrial age. If you and I are working on an assembly line and I all of a sudden become very entrepreneurial about my piece, everything gets messed up. So I need to follow the rules. Whereas today, we're working in a different realm. And I know you've written about that a lot. And I think about that a lot too, and how quickly everything changes. So maybe we master Zoom and like next month, it's a whole new thing that we're working on. So, we've got to quickly pivot and learn something new. It kind of works that way.
But I want to come back to something you said. It's interesting to me, like younger people are coming to you and saying, like, I'm more comfortable with you telling me exactly what you want and how to do it. I hear that and I think that's the student that comes to the teacher and says, what do I got to do to get the A?
That's right. What's going to be on the test? Because I only want to study. And I mean, it's not droves of people. I'm just saying there's a couple people in my life that I find that, and it could be like a personality style too. I mean, there are certain things like accountants, you don't really want them to be overly creative. So, to some extent, it's the environment that you're comfortable with. But and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people that don't follow any rules, and it's very difficult at times to navigate. I share with you, Gary, one example that I heard and I think about all the time. Dr. Ed Massey, who is now the president emeritus of Indian River State Community College down there in Florida, he gave me the analogy of a hunting dog. And I think about this all the time because, I'm not a hunter myself, but the way that those dogs are trained, they always follow the rules. But within the rules, they will jump over, go under, dig. I mean, they basically will do anything to get to the end result. And I think in higher education and probably education in general, I mean, what we want to raise up are hunting dogs. We want people that have that passion to hunt and to chase and to love it, but they will work as a team. They will follow the rules. Maybe they get really close to the edge, but you can count on them because they will work together and that they will ultimately, achieve the end result. So I attribute that to Ed, but I think that there's some wisdom in that for all of us, because the space in between is that entrepreneurial space. How do I figure this out? How do I get, to use your words, to my end goal?
I hear this so much in the entrepreneurs I've interviewed. You can hear in the language something that Martin Seligman calls the hope circuit. The hope circuit is open. They're saying things like, I got to find a way. I got to learn something from this person, or I have to find a way. And you can hear it. I mean, you can hear it in the language. You see this internal locus of control. Like, it's up to me. I've got to figure it out. And what's interesting, Becky, I've recently came across some research also published by Martin Seligman that when we're pursuing a compelling goal, our brains are able to access unprecedented problem-solving abilities that are not otherwise available to us when we're engaged in routinized, other-directed tasks. And so, we look at successful entrepreneurs and we tend to attribute their behavior to their genetic predisposition, to their, dispositional traits. But it's really a much more a factor of the situation, and we don't realize that the goal is acting upon the individual. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about this a little bit before we went live, that one of the distinguishing factors between the entrepreneur and the non-entrepreneur is a compelling goal. And another one of my, I'll call them mindset questions I like to ask people is, do you have a compelling goal? And, by compelling, I mean something you're thinking about all the time. Mm-hmm. Something that gets you up on Sunday morning when you had a cup of coffee, you're thinking about it. But then the second part of the question is, if you don't have one, why not? Right?
Or how might you get one? How might you
right
get connected to that? Okay, so you're on vacation, right? And so you're tuning into this webinar. And if I had to guess, I suspect that you have the same experience when you go on vacation. Like, as soon as I go on vacation, I have a really hard time not thinking about work. And when I say work, it's doing that which I love. I have a hard time turning off my brain. And then it takes me a while to kind of unwind. And what I find is, if I'm successful in that, it's, to your point, sometimes, solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable kind of come to you because you kind of slow down and you're able to kind of lean into that space. And I've always thought this, that having a passion in a project, however humble or however grand, is such a blessing. I learned that from my grandparents. They were not educated people. Neither one of them had graduated from college, but my grandmother was a telephone operator, and she took such immense pride in what she did. And it was so core to who she was. And I think having, sort of that ethos. Now, of course, they were on the mindset that you should, be a teacher or a nurse, or, have a safe profession, if you will. But it kind of opened up the idea about the passion of the work and really having, entrepreneurial mindset. If you do choose a traditional career like that, you can still be entrepreneurial, because you can look at your patient as your customer. You can look at your student as your co-collaborator. So in some respects, to your point, I don't think it really matters whether you're creating a business, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're an author, whatever you're doing. This is an open invitation for everyone.
I couldn't agree more with you, Becky. And I the way I think about it is that, I think of it like in terms of a Venn diagram with 3 spheres. The first sphere is the things that you are naturally interested in. And by and large, you really don't get to decide that. That's kind of part of who you are. That's hardwired. The second sphere is, what are you capable of becoming good at?
Mm-hmm.
And if you just draw a circle around those 2 spheres, like where those 2 spheres overlap, you create something I would call authenticity. And that's just that authenticity gives you an advantage. As Naval Ravikant said, you can escape competition through authenticity. Right? And then the third sphere would be the needs of other humans. And in the overlap between what you're interested in, what you're capable of becoming good at, and what other humans need, is where you become optimally engaged. Like in that intersection is where we tap into the most potent form of human motivation. We call it intrinsic motivation. And I think that entrepreneurial people stumble into that trifecta blindly, for a variety of reasons. I mean, some people set out to pursue their passion. Good, fair enough. Some people are kind of forced into it through economic situation or for other reasons. But I think that's what we should be doing more in education, is encouraging people to find that intersection, rather than following career paths per se. And I might have said this to you before. I get a little nervous when I hear educators talking about career paths. It makes me a little jittery, because I want to know, what do you mean when you say career path? Because to me, that implies linearity. It implies certainty. It implies, stability. And I think that the world we're facing is increasingly less of any of that.
I heard someone one time choose the analogy of a jungle gym rather than a path. And I think for women in particular, but I think for all of us really, that might have, abrupt changes to careers of our own choosing and not of our own choosing. I think the jungle gym is kind of a cool analogy, because you don't just go in a linear path. Sometimes you zig and you zag, or sometimes you take this big flying leap, and sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think, thinking of always, how do you make your way forward, and how do you really understand yourself? And I think accept yourself. I mean, I think that, I'm hopeful about this younger generation, because I see them by and large of being very accepting of other people. And I think about when I was, that age, just living in a slightly different time, I don't think people were so accepting always of differences. Now there's, challenges to every generation, but when you were talking about the social good, and I think of the number of young people that aspire to be social entrepreneurs, if you will, could create something that benefits humanity or helps animals or helps another person. those are the things I think for all of us in entrepreneurial journeys, when we have dark days, because we all do,
Yep.
we've got to really focus on the hopeful aspects of it. And I think entrepreneurship is perfect, because if I'm a young person, I want to change the world. Okay, well, I don't have any power and I probably don't have any money. So but what I can have is entrepreneurial mindset, and I can be really savvy, and I can go out and I can make connections, and I can ask for things that people in their wildest dreams never would imagine that I could get. And I think that's, goes back to your whole point initially, Gary, about moving from the perimeter to the core. It equalizes power. Think about that, power structures. I know you wanted to talk about equity, but in my mind, the quickest route to an equitable society is, financial literacy, it's entrepreneurial mindset, and it's opportunity. And it doesn't have to be millions of dollars of opportunity. I mean, we've seen at NACCE, giving an aspiring entrepreneur $4,000 or $5,000 and giving them support through a community college. Many of them in 3 months can be cash positive and turn a solo business into something that hires 3 or 4 or 10 people. I mean, that's how the economy is going to rebuild, I think.
Let's talk about that for a second, Becky. I mean, I forgot what the guy's name was. Let me think of Birch. I forgot. I think David Birch published a book in 1987, I want to say. He's an economist, and he was the first one to point out that it's actually the small businesses that are creating the vast majority of all net new jobs. And people just assumed up until that point that it was large organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at the SBA data here. I think it's 96% of all new jobs are coming from firms that are 5 years old or less, that have 9 or fewer employees, 9. Right. So in the aggregate, the small businesses are the engines of the economy in the aggregate. And you and I were talking about this briefly. I want to bring this up. I think of the benefits of entrepreneurship education in 2 different categories. I think the first and most common is the economic benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks for itself. That's not controversial. But I think what's so often ignored, Becky, are the developmental benefits, which I think you and I might be able to do more to help, put that idea out there in a way to help shift from the perimeter to the core. Because the benefits, to the individual, what I mean by that, Becky, are the resourcefulness, the creative and critical thinking, the way it shifts the individual's mindset. And I think if we were to focus on the developmental benefits, the economic will take care of themselves. And I think that's how we should be thinking about it. It's like Viktor Frankl once said, you can't pursue happiness. It must ensue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same is so without going off too far in the weeds, if you just look at the economic benefits, forget about the developmental for a second, but just look at the economic benefits of entrepreneurship. I can't quite figure out why we are not teaching entrepreneurship starting in first grade, why it's not been infused in the curriculum. And I think, maybe that responsibility lands on our shoulders, you and I, to help articulate the value proposition, because we got to move away from the idea that it's all about starting a business. And I think that's the greatest challenge. The definition of entrepreneurship is woefully out of date. It's woefully inadequate. I mean, the definition arose at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution to distinguish between someone who organized the business and someone who operated the business.
Mm-hmm.
But now the people who operate the business want people to be entrepreneurial in the business. Right? So I think that's one of the challenges perhaps. And I don't know if that was a question or a comment or me just, going off.
No, I think, Gary, I think you're right. And I was just looking at the chat here, and I think Sophia noted we need attractive curriculum, certificate programs, et cetera, experienced instructors. And I think, I heard the term the other day on our podcast from Charles Nippen, edutainment. And I think, especially for kids, like making things fun, not only for kids, but for adults and for teachers, and thinking about how can we create habits that aren't difficult, but can really make profound change. I'll give you one quick example, is brushing people's teeth, which we all do now just routinely, but in the early 1900s, that was not a habit. And they try to, say these are the health benefits, because you literally can die from a toothache. It can infect you, and once your blood, it can kill you. But where they really made progress is the jingles with the toothpaste, because all of a sudden they conveyed to people that if you brush your teeth, you'll have a nice white smile. And it was like the research and the data that didn't quite, compel people, but it sounds, I guess, inauthentic in a way, but it's really important, I think, to have things that are fun, things that are simple. And, the word entrepreneurship in and of itself, like even people who've been studying it forever spell it wrong, is fun, is like making it easy to adopt. And I think, to Sophia's comment, having things at the ready, so that, I don't know if you remember this as a kid, but when you go to the dentist, you got to go in the treasure box and pick out a little prize. And I remember as a little kid going to the dentist and thinking, oh man, I can't wait. I just can't wait to get into that treasure box. And
right.
like, how can we inject that level of, fun and creativity, and we're not here to suffer, and, that whole Protestant work ethic, and all of that, which probably helped, the foundation, but, thinking about what we might do, as we were talking about earlier this morning. I mean, that's what excites me. And I think, a lot of the problems, but the opportunities that you've identified, and starting earlier downstream, so that we're not, it's very difficult and I've taught in many colleges, once you get somebody who's 20, 21, 41, I mean, if they've not even exposed to entrepreneurship, you can do it, but it's tough. But if you can kind of prime the pump, if you will, in kindergarten, Kelly Cheney did develop a coloring book around entrepreneurship. So little kids are not going to create businesses, but they start to, get comfortable with words and concepts. And then, boy, by the time they're in middle school, when, especially for girls, self-esteem drops, if you've already infused, to your point about developmental milestones, if you already infused a sense of possibility and creativity, maybe, some of them can lean into that when it becomes this just terrible peer pressure in some cases, and then on to high school, where maybe they will start a business and do things. So I agree with you, Gary. Obviously, we both love talking about these concepts, but I think, the equity piece too, of really getting people to embrace what is special about them, no matter what they look like, no matter what their abilities are, and thinking about what gifts do they have that can be shared with the world, that can enrich their lives and others' lives, is what I heard you say with social entrepreneurship. And I think that's why we do the work that we do. I mean, I every day am thinking about, like, how can we be a part of rebuilding the economy? How can we be a part of making this planet heal, and those who are left out or left behind included? And I think entrepreneurship is it. And I think we've got attention here in the United States for that message. And I think all of us today, spending an hour together, talking and listening about it, we are the change makers. We are the people that will and are working toward changing the world. And that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, we have to be the change we hope to see in the world.
Right.
No
That's
question
right.
about it, Becky. I 100% with you. And I want to get to the equity piece now. I'm really eager to have that conversation with you as well. Nick, I want to just pause for a second. Are there any questions that you want to address?
Yeah, a couple good ones. And actually, I'll go out of order to your point about including some of the equity piece in this. So I'll start with a question from Ernie. Ernie says, as Gary knows, my compelling goal is to create situations in which retirees 65 and up can contribute significantly to society. And in the US, community colleges are the envy of the developed world. Gads, we've got to fix the enrollment problem. Are we reaching out to retirees? And I think that's a really important piece. A lot of this conversation has been about the how we embrace this on a young perspective, but how can we embrace people of all ages as well, to fill that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in first if you want, Gary. I know the AARP and AARP Foundation has some amazing programs that they're rolling out. I think they want to be front and center to the conversation. The way I look at it too is, think of AARP, you have to be 50 or older to join. But if you look at the life expectancy of people, you have decades post 50 to work. And maybe you've got a little bit of capital, or maybe you don't, but you definitely have things that you can contribute. So I think it's a great question. And I think there are resources out there. I think that we need to do more of that. I mean, the average age for a community college student is 28, which is still fairly young, but you do have, lifelong learning programs and things like that. I think we just need to shine a light on them and replicate them.
100%.
And Clint Day, nice to see you on with us, Clint, is chiming in and backing you up on that, Becky. That's great.
Clint is amazing. Hi, Clint. He walks the talk every day. One of our most engaged volunteers. And since you mentioned Clint, I'll just say, Clint had a very successful insurance career, and then decided he wanted to be, a college professor around entrepreneurship. And I don't remember the exact time that he did that, but he and his wife Donna, who interestingly enough, I went through the first Ice House training of myself with down in Florida, just exemplify that. Age is truly just a number. You're never really too old, I don't think. And as long as you're breathing, you can always, you can do anything you want. You just have to get that mindset that it's possible.
Absolutely. Any other questions in the chat before, or the Q&A, Nick?
Leslie's got two. One is more philosophical, so I may save that for the end. But another one kind of around the question of what is it that we can do now? She asks, should we then be emphasizing intrapreneurship for people who choose to be employees because they're less comfortable with risk? I thought you both could have some interesting thoughts there.
I do have some thoughts there. My first thought is that I would back away from the idea that risk tolerance as a dispositional trait is as important as you might think, because it's probably not. And and to be fair, you look up the definition of entrepreneurship, it's going to tell you someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit, which is grossly misleading in my view. It makes, the entrepreneurs seem like all they're interested in is money. And I just not seen that in at least in my observation and in evaluation of hundreds and hundreds of everyday entrepreneurs. There's a purpose component there too. But also, Leslie, I would say that the risk tolerance is situational. If you love your job and you're well paid and you're satisfied with it, you're going to have a different risk tolerance than if you lose your job and you can't easily replace it and you've got to feed your family. So first of all, I want to say that risk tolerance is very often a situational rather than a dispositional attribute. But the second thing is, I also don't think entrepreneurship, it's often framed as gambling, and that annoys the hell out of me. It's like, let's go get a bunch of money and just put it all on the table and see if it works. And that's not what entrepreneurs do. They actually mitigate the risk through micro experimentation in the margins. They put at risk some small, what an economist would call an affordable loss, and they tinker in the margins without quitting their job or dropping out of school or whatever. So I forgot what the question is now. I'm sorry.
Well, the refocusing on entrepreneurship as kind of a bridge into some of the mindset concepts we've been talking about.
Yeah. I get it. And I vacillate whether we should, use the term, make that distinction or not. I just think we all need to redefine it in a way that anyone can embrace. When you look at the skills employers demand, they're entrepreneurial skills.
Right.
People call them soft skills, whatever you want to call them. And I want to get to the equity piece, but the big question for me is, how do we help educators recognize the extent to which other directed, routinized learning stifles the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills? And that's really the big question for me. It's like everybody's got to develop some modicum of risk tolerance in order to adapt and thrive in the 21st century, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think about even myself. I don't see myself as someone to take big risks. But I do believe I'm very entrepreneurial, and I do what Gary does. I'll place small bets on things, or I might invest in something, and then I will sort of evaluate it and look at it. And sometimes if the data comes back and everything lines up, I think really, even if you don't have a high risk tolerance, sometimes you need to go all in. And I have found those times, both times that worked and didn't work, to be exhilarating. And I don't think I would have sometimes taken those leaps as quickly had I not been cultivating an entrepreneurial mindset. Didn't mean I was like betting my house or, doing things that were risky in that sense, but applying for that big job or saying that you want to do something that people in your family are going to say, that's crazy. We don't understand that. Why did you, get all these degrees and you're doing, whatever. But it's having that sense that there's this driving sense of purpose, and you're going to collect the data. You're going to do the experimentation. You are going to embrace, as Gary said, affordable loss. So you're not going to put your family at risk, but you're going to find a way to move forward. It's interesting to me because I know the job that I've had here for the last 7 years. I think that it makes me sad sometimes, but I don't think I could ever go back and work for a college and university unless I was running it, because you become so, enthralled in this space where you have this sense of agency and you can build this sense of team. And I think all of us, regardless of what our roles are, aspirations are, when you find that sweet spot, like Gary's talking about, where you jump out of bed and you think, even if I wasn't getting paid for this, I'd do it anyway. And I think that is your sectors of figuring out who you are. And there's so many educators on the line. I think that is our role when we put on our education hat, to help people that come into our lives, young students, older students, everywhere in between, to help them find their purpose. And I think through entrepreneurial mindset, I think they can do that. Also, there's some really good tools for exploring that. There's some skills assessments. A lot of them are free. You can look for those online and really start to understand and help others understand, what are their assets and how might they be a person like me that didn't have a high risk tolerance, but if I measured it over the last 12 years, I am so much more risk tolerant than I was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah. I've learned other skills, right?
Yeah. That then you can't not have some appetite for risk. And I've said this before that my view of entrepreneurship comes from this a humanistic perspective. which is the belief that all humans have the innate desire to self-actualize, just like any other living thing. And that, and maybe this is the segue into the equity piece. And I should probably say that earlier in these conversations, but I believe that every human being is an acorn with the desire and the potential to become a mighty oak tree. I mean, that's my, back of an envelope analogy of humanistic perspective, right? That desire, what did Kurt Goldstein call it? The master motivator. It's in every living thing. So that's the premise that I'm starting from. Most of us find ourselves in situations where we can't self-actualize. We're acorns and we're stuck in a flower pot or a window box. We're stuck in an environment where we're just not able to flourish and grow. And that's what I've always seen as entrepreneurship as a path, as a channel within. Let me say this differently. When we zoom out and look at an entrepreneur, as if you were looking like in a petri dish in a laboratory, all I think you're seeing is a human organism trying to self-actualize. They're trying to express themselves. They're trying to live authentically and fully and exchanging, like creating something useful for other humans, which is a very, very powerful intrinsic motivating force. And that's what, that's where Clifton and I came together for Ice House and to sort of push back on the idea that entrepreneurship is the domain of, the elite kids at private universities, the young white male at Stanford or Babson or Harvard or whatever. We wanted to kind of push back on that notion of entrepreneurship and sort of democratize the idea. So Becky, I just wanted to use that sort of as a segue to talk about how you see entrepreneurship in community colleges. Where does inclusion come into that, or equity and inclusion come into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the demographics of community colleges across the country, more than 50% are non-white. So they are very diverse. A number of first-generation students, many that have, resource challenges because, we have some community colleges and HBCUs where 80% of the students are Pell eligible. And, for the educators on the line, Pell eligibility, you have to have a fairly low income to qualify. So I think it is, inherent in the mission of community colleges to focus on equity. I think during the pandemic and certainly the George Floyd murder and sort of honoring and understanding his life and what he represents caused us to have a greater conversation, a needed conversation. And what I keep talking to people about and what we keep working on at NACCE is how can we get more momentum to move things forward? And I think you see in society that, certain states, are now not allowing discussions over certain topics, controversial topics like critical race theory and other things. And I was at a conference, I won't identify the president that said this, but it just spoke to me, and I shared it with one of our board members the other day, happens to be an African-American president. Is somebody asked the question, we were in Tennessee, and they said, how do you respond to that? You're not allowed to teach critical race theory. And I saw this president take a risk, and it was very authentic, but the response was, we're not calling it that. We are doing our best to lean into our integrity and to teach what we know is what our students need. I mean, to me, on the equity piece, I think that demonstrates courage. I think it speaks to what we were talking about how words are important, but open conversations are important. And to me, I think the greatest thing that we can do on the equity agenda is not only support, people who are not helped, brown and Black owned businesses that didn't get response and help from the CARES Act through a variety of problems that I know the administration is trying to address, but have more of these conversations. They sometimes can be super uncomfortable, but that's the way that we begin to understand each other and begin to move it forward, which has all kinds of other benefits.
Yeah. I like that a lot, Becky. I think it has created the environment where we have the potential to have important conversations around this issue. I just saw, when I met Clifton Talbert, and I don't know if I've ever told you the backstory, but I was doing a research project for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in San Jose, California. And this was 2008, something like that. And they asked me to do a gap analysis on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in the United States. And it was very, this is 2008, lots have improved since then. In 2008, we were still very much in the world of business plans as a starting place for entrepreneurship. But I quickly saw that the way entrepreneurship is being characterized in the classroom was largely divorced from the reality of what a typical entrepreneur is actually doing. And then so Cisco came back to me and, I was kind of naive. And they said, well, what are they actually doing? And I said, well, I have a hunch, but I'm not really sure. And so that's where I got the opportunity. Cisco gave me the platform to go across the country and start interviewing hundreds of what I would call everyday entrepreneurs. I wasn't interested in the Elon Musk and Richard Branson, Mark Zuckerberg stories, which I consider to be more or less lottery winners. Then I wanted to understand how people who have no particular advantage in life, they're not at Stanford, they don't have big ideas, access to venture capital or rich relatives, how do they do it? Mm-hmm. And when I was flying around the country, hearing all these crazy stories, when I stumbled into Clifton's story, I latched onto it. And because it takes place in the Mississippi Delta at the height of legal segregation, and the way his Uncle Cleve taught him how to think like an entrepreneur in spite of the circumstances. And to me, I remember walking out of his office, I think it was April of 2008, and I turned to the camera guy and I just said, that's why we came to Tulsa. I didn't know what I was looking for specifically, but it was that story that gripped me, that demonstrated the power of ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things by embracing this way of thinking. That to me is it goes back to my definition, Becky. You can empower yourself by making yourself useful to other humans.
Well, and I would add on to that, and I don't know if it's part of anybody's definition, but that opportunity identification where it's the same what you described on that journey and meeting him and seeing the opportunity was the same experience that I was trying to convey when I started my journey in community colleges. I knew that was where I was supposed to be. And how I got there was a little circuitous, but I think people who are entrepreneurial, they sort of are always looking for opportunity and risk. And when you see it, you see it. And I think that's every human being, I think, is capable of that. But you have to kind of train yourself and start to get yourself into a space where you're gonna encounter the serendipity, experiences. And that's what I always encourage people to do. When I was teaching, I try to get people out of the classroom, get them out and about, because that's where you're going to make the connection. And now with the pandemic, we haven't been out and about as much, but I think that is just a really, really good way to emphasize the point and look at all these years later, how the story still resonates and it's built upon itself, and it's, who
Yeah.
knows how much else it's spurred in terms of its impact.
Yeah. It's, I want to come back to something you just said a second ago, Becky. It's how do you get somebody to that attitude? I mean, how do you get somebody to that frame of mind? And I think I'm coming back to the hope circuit here, the hope circuit in the brain. How do you get somebody to think that way? I mean, it sounds like, oh, you just have to think this way and not that way. And I just don't think it's that simple. And I don't have it figured out. But, Seligman's work around learned helplessness was very, very influential in my research around the entrepreneurial mindset. And, he did the research back in the 60s, shocking dogs in cages. And, one group of dogs was able to escape the shock, and the second group was not able to escape it. And then they put the dogs in a shuttle box where they shocked one side of the cage, and the dog could easily hop over a little barrier to escape the shock. And the first group of dogs that were able to escape the shock earlier, they jumped right over the wall. But the dogs who were not able to escape the shock earlier, when they were shocked in this situation that was easily escapable, they didn't even try to escape. They just would whimper and lie down. And, what Seligman wrote about in his book called The Hope Circuit is they actually found in the late 90s, the circuitry in the brain, they found out that helplessness is not learned. It's actually a default state. From an evolutionary perspective, it's when you find yourself in an adverse circumstance that your brain decides that you cannot escape, your brain actually shuts down the fight or flight response and causes passivity as a survival mechanism. And one of the things that Seligman pointed out to me is that one of the insidious nature of default helplessness is such that a person doesn't recognize a solution when it's unambiguously presented to them. Right? So, and I think there's a lot of folks out there that are perfectly capable, but they might be suffering from some level of helplessness. And so the question is, how do we open that hope circuit? And I think that's, part of what we're trying to do with Ice House is expose people to examples, to relatable social models of others who have escaped similar or worse circumstances. I think that's part of the answer. I don't think it's the whole answer.
I think in a way, though, you answered it yourself. I mean, it's stories. I mean, it's stories. It's things that we can remember. I think, to some degree, people have different belief systems, but I think that's where kind of a spiritual component comes in. And some people, but it's practicing it. And it's, I think, having mentors. We haven't even talked about that, but yep. I think the impact that we can have in each other's lives is critical, and there's sometimes, I think we need to think a little more expansively about mentors. It doesn't have to be the person with the gray hair that's the mentor always. I've seen, young people, be mentors to older people, and it's not the person with the most degrees. Sometimes it's the person who's done it, but I think it's being open to that. And I think, it kind of gets back to, Gary, to your sense of humanity and not forgetting, at our core, how important empathy is and how might we, really, when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, even someone who is frustrating to deal with and, change of mindset, it's not easy because people have to be willing to be open. The way I look at it is you have early adopters, like all of us on this call, who like, got a little taste of it and we're like, oh my gosh, this is for me, and we're off to the races. The next big segment is what I've heard people call the movable middle. They're not the early adopters like we are, but they're not the people trying to tip the canoe over at the end because they're so resistant.
Right.
And I think, how can we as leaders and authors and community members, how can we focus our efforts on the movable middle? I mean, has there ever been a better example than the vaccine issue? I mean, everybody who's an early adopter, they already got their vaccine. They waited in line 2 hours, and then, you have sort of this lull, and then you have this opportunity, which is a mindset thing, right? You have people who are afraid, people who have different belief systems, but how do you get them to move, and how do you get them to embrace something? And so, I mean, I think it's a whole combination of things, but I believe that each of us has our gifts and things that we came to this world to do. And I think part of our mission, I personally don't think it is to make a pile of money, but I think we want a good lifestyle, and different people have different aspirational goals. But if we can help each other along the way, through communities, community colleges, other institutions that we come in contact with, to help us find our way, but also when we fall down and things don't go well and we make mistakes, how can we provide pathways for people to get back on track where, it's not, because the entrepreneurial friends that I have tend to be the least judgmental people that I know, because you mess something up and they're like, oh, that was great that you tried. I mean, that's refreshing, because a lot of society, there's this shaming culture, or this, since I'm the woman presenter here, I mean, there's this idea that you have to do it perfectly, or you have to do it, in a certain way, and you're not embracing who you are. I think entrepreneurial mindset frees us from those things. I mean, we can't just run roughshod over other people, but if we're embracing humanity, empathy, all of those things at the same time, we're not going to do that anyway, because we're going to be caring about each other.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, Becky, like you got to be willing to look like an idiot in the beginning. Like, that's a superpower, right? If you're not willing to look foolish, you're never going to get there. You're never going to, get unstuck.
You're not. And I think that's sort of the trick. If you can learn to laugh at yourself a little bit. And I mean, I'll never forget, I think you were there. We were in Tampa, Florida several years ago for the NACCE conference. And at the 11th hour, we were giving an award for a Lifetime Achievement Award winner. And they handed me the speech, and the individual happened to be of Hispanic origin. And they said, well, you're going to need to speak that, you're going to need to deliver the speech in Spanish. And I'm like, I don't even I don't speak Spanish, for one thing. And it was so funny. I was sitting there thinking, oh, I'm just going to be completely embarrassed and mortified. And they said, no, it's really important. It's in Spanish. So you know what we did? There was a band there. So I said to my colleague, I said, just go have them turn the music up on the band. So as we started, the music crescendoed. And people thought, they said, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you knew how to speak Spanish, but they really didn't hear me speak, but they got what they wanted. And so anyway, it's just a funny example of how sometimes life puts you in these positions where you could completely look like an absolute, fool, I guess. And then, you either lean into it and you laugh at yourself and you try to make the best of the situation. But I think also surrounding ourselves with each other, people like us on the call and people that are tuning in. I know for me personally, I mean, I've never met a group of more caring and collaborative people in my life since I have gotten into this space. And I hear that and see that from other people too. Like they, going back to just strictly academic environment or hyper competitive environments, or environments where not bringing your whole self to the table is honored. Once you are not in that space anymore, a lot of people don't want to go back to that. And you see that in the pandemic. People do not want to go back to jobs that were sucking their souls and keeping them away from things that made them happy. And I quite frankly think that's a good thing, because that's not what we were brought to the world to do, is to suffer,
Right. Again, it's back to the human capitalization thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. Nick, do we have stuff in the Q&A you want to get to? I know we're kind of,
Mostly it's folks just chiming in with affirmations of things you were saying. Clint Day pointed out, you can teach evidence-based, or I'm sorry, he's been fascinated by how to impart desire in entrepreneurship students, and you can teach evidence-based startup, but student must have a desire to make it work. Back to that compelling goal concept. And the closest thing he has come to is to spur those desires is the work of Dr. Seligman, just affirming what you were saying with that. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, though, feel free to chime in. Great to have Clint and everyone else's participation, though.
yeah. So, but back to the desire thing for a second. I've been thinking about this, Clint, that like, there's a theory that came forth in the 60s. I think it's called value expectancy theory. And it basically boils it down to like, do you value the outcome, the extent to which you value the outcome, and then the extent to which you believe that you're actually going to achieve the outcome you desire. I think that's the challenge when how to impart desire in the students. Is, you know, at Ice House, the first lesson in Ice House is asking students to write about the life they want to achieve. Like, what kind of life do you want to live? Don't think about how you're going to get there, or how much money you're going to need, or how smart you got to be. Just think about what it could be. If Brian Scudamore said, if you saw no limits, what kind of life do you want to live? That's the first thing. It's like, you know, what are you aiming for? And so many people just they don't have anything to aim for. It's just like, I want to pay the bills and I want to retire. And I think without that compelling goal, that's how. And so thinking about the future you want to create, there's a mountain of research. There's a whole field of psychology emerging called prospection. I'm reading a fascinating book now by Seligman and some other scholars about, we shouldn't be called Homo sapiens because Homo sapiens means the wise man, and we're about to destroy the planet. So that's probably not a great moniker, but Homo prospective is such that he's saying what differentiates us is we're able to think about the future. And a compelling goal enables us to navigate into the future rather than being driven by the past. And I don't know if you have time to find this, Nick, or dig it up, but there's a paper that Seligman wrote about that entitled Navigating the Future or Driven by the Past. And I can't emphasize it enough. So engaging the student to think about, like, what's the big picture? What's the compelling goal? As Nietzsche taught us, right? Once you have a why to live for, you can endure almost anyhow. Thank you, Nick. Nick just put that paper. And then so one more piece I just want to add to this, Becky, is that so thinking about the future they want to create, and then exposing students to relatable social models, people who came from similar or worse circumstances, succeeding in similar endeavors.
You know, Gary, I was going to say too, you know, a bit ago when we were talking about maker spaces and making things, I think one exercise that I've done with people, I've done it in classes, we've done it in workshops, is actually an exercise in visioning. And the way you can do it is you can like flip through magazines, you can capture images that captivate you, they speak to you. So you could think about your goals, you could think about the life that you would like to have. And it's a fun exercise because it sort of unlocks your unconscious mind. You're drawn toward things that sort of represent that. And then what you do, and then the next part of a vision board exercise is you actually, you know, put those pieces together on a piece of paper, and it might be quotes that inspire you. Several years ago, I was working on one because I like to do it around the beginning of the year, like what are my goals for the year? And I cut out a picture of this house, and it just, I don't know, I just thought it was beautiful. I loved it. But at the time, we weren't even really planning on moving. We lived in New Jersey at the time. And I put that on the vision board, and I thought, I was almost like having a conversation with myself, like what attracted me to that house, and why did I like that so much, and a few other little things. And then as I would do later in the year and go back to it, I realized, during the pandemic, my family and I actually moved to Raleigh. And it's striking to me how similar sort of the image of that house is to where we live now. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can think about if you just want to kind of tap into your own creativity, make things, and do what Gary's doing. Try to get a point of what makes you passionate and what are you working toward.
Well, Becky, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it goes back to the prospection thing. Like in an earlier conversation, we were talking about, like, how do you get somebody who's stuck? Maybe not hopeless is too strong a word, but they're stuck. And this is why mindset is so important. Our brains go to work solving problems when they're at rest. That's why the vision board works. So if we ask ourselves a question, if you ask yourself a question in a binary way, can I or can't I? Your brain's going to dispose of it one way or the other. But if you ask yourself, how can I? Your brain, your subconscious mind, this is absolutely fascinating. It's called the default mode. When your brain is at rest, it's not at rest. It's hard at work trying to figure out a way. And it's happening beneath your conscious awareness. This is what I keep coming back to in the entrepreneur. We look at them as if they're somehow possessed with some characteristics or traits, when it's really, in fact, the fact that they're pursuing a compelling goal. And they're constantly thinking about what's the next step? How can I get there? So the hack is to just put the how in front.
Mm-hmm.
How can I? Instead of just saying, can I? Right? We got to find a way.
And if you're working in a group, we use this a lot, in the work that I do, because we're all confronted with challenges. Can we have a conference? Are we going to be all virtual? What's happening? And just using the words similar to Gary's of how might we? Because if you say to yourself or to a group, well, how might we do this? What it does is it gets you into that ideation phase where you're not naturally going to say, well, we can't do that because we don't have enough money, or there's these regulations or these litany of reasons why we can't do it. Because how might we is expansive, and it's open, and it's getting you into a place where you're not feeling, like Gary said, you're not feeling stuck. And, if you're dealing with a student who has a bad grade or a person that has a bad attitude, like how might we, elevate the situation so that we, can move together and move forward toward achieving a goal. And I think, what I've heard from this conversation, Gary, is really, the essence of your story, but also the importance for all of us for our stories. And if our story is not a hero's journey, then we need to rewrite the story, and we need to get our people in our orbit to rewrite their stories. If it's too small, or you're the victim, or it's that helpless mindset, task number one is to rework that, and that in and of itself is empowering, right? So yeah,
I read something about that this morning, Becky. Who was it? They called it the life lie. I forgot. It was somebody famous wrote about that. It's like a life lie. Like, I want to do important things. I want to do cool things, but the world won't let me. And I need to do some more research around that. But that you're exactly right. It's like your own hero's journey. Like, and to your point, Becky, I firmly believe. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of these underdog entrepreneurs, and I can say with 100% certainty, like, we are all more capable more powerful than we can possibly imagine. And I was thinking about this sitting on the river the other day. The the two most limiting thoughts are beliefs are the belief that opportunities don't exist, or the belief that one is not capable. And sometimes those are the same belief. But that's what the stories of the everyday entrepreneur, the unlikely entrepreneur, that's what Ice House Entrepreneurship is all about. It's, to me, Becky, it's all about demystifying and democratizing entrepreneurship as a path to not only economic empowerment, but to psychological well-being, to human flourishing. That's what I want people, that's what I want to be my legacy, is to be able to more broadly embrace entrepreneurship, stop thinking of it as a business discipline, and look at it as a behavioral phenomenon.
Right. Or a lifestyle, you know, you choose every day. You choose your story, you choose the people that you surround yourself with. You have immense power. I mean, you're right. We all do. People underestimate, I mean, the amount of power that they have because society tells you a different story. And, you know, I think that's why entrepreneurship is scary sometimes to people and to leaders, you know, and that's probably a whole other conversation, but
yeah. You know, what I've been saying to people lately is like, take some small amount of money, $500, $100, something you can afford to lose, and figure out how to make it 10 times that amount in your spare time. Everyone should have that exercise, and put the money in a separate account. So if you take $500 and turn it into $5,000, you have $5,000, and you can see it, you can look at it, you can touch it. You can say, I made that happen through my own effort, through my own ingenuity. That's a life-changing experience. Okay, I think we're ready to wrap up. Becky, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. We'll post this on our website, on the Eli website. We'll send it to you. You can thank you.
It out too, yeah.
Yes, we'll share it out. And thank you for everyone for joining us for this webinar. I've had a great conversation. Becky, I love the work you're doing. Keep on rocking.
Thank you. You too. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for
Becky.
tuning in. Okay.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.